Now for our next set of examples, we're going to be taking a look at some new things we can do with text. So let's bring out a new file that we can work with. Let me go ahead and close up that old HTML file, and we'll bring up the fourth file, trytexteffects.html. Once again, I'll bring it up in my browser here, and we'll go ahead and bring it up in the TextEdit application so we can work on it. Now there's a few things I wanted to try out. We'll notice that we have an H1 heading tag there, and then a paragraph that's sitting in a div called content. In fact, we've got a couple paragraphs down here. Let's start with the H1 tag first. To make text pop, we've got a lot of different things we can try. We can give it some color, size, and what we're going to do here first is we're going to try out a drop shadow, but this one is just for text. Let's set this up by going up to the Style section, and we'll add a style for the H1 tag. I'll go ahead and add my opening and closing braces. And for the style, we're going to try out the new text shadow property. This property works very similar to the box shadow property that we saw before. It has several possible values, and the first two are the horizontal and vertical offset components for the shadow, and they're required. So let's set up our shadow to have about an 8-pixel offset in the horizontal direction and the vertical one. And for now, we'll just use the two required values, and I'll close off that statement. We'll save our changes so we can go out and test it. Let me go out to the browser. I'll just refresh the page, and there we can see our shadow. Now, it looks a bit funny at first because we've got black text and a black shadow underneath it. But that's because both of them are set at default colors. So let's go make some changes, and we'll make it look a little prettier. We'll go back to our document over here. And first of all, in the H1 section, I'm going to use the normal color property to change the color of the text. Since we just learned about our new RGB values, let's try that again. I'll just specify RGB, we'll add parentheses, and then I just need to give the 3 components for the colors. And I kind of want it to be red, so I'm just going to go with an easy one. I'm just going to use 255, which is the maximum red. Then I'll use 0 for green and blue. We'll close that up, and that'll change the color of my text. Now, while we're at it, why don't we go ahead and spice up the shadow a little bit too? There are 2 additional properties you can add to specify some differences on the shadow. The first one is a blur value, and it works just like the one on the box shadow property. We just specify an amount for the blur, and I want to go for a pretty heavy blur, so I'm just going to use a 6-pixel blur here. And then following that, we can specify a color for our shadow. Notice there's no spread property for shadows. I just want to go with a simple gray, so again, I'll use my RGB value. And for gray, I just need a medium amount, like let's say about 150. And if I put in the same for red, green, and blue, I'll end up with a nice uniform gray. Now let's save our changes, and we'll see how our page looks. I'll go back and refresh it in the browser, and we can see we've got that red text up here now from our RGB value, and we can see a nice soft gray shadow floating behind it. What's really nice here is that it follows all the shapes of the text. So let's tighten up the shadow just a little bit. I'll go back and change the value of 6 to, let's say, about 3. Save that change. And when we go back, we should see a little bit more definition to the shadow, but still a nice gray, soft shadow behind our title. Now, while we're on this page, let's see if we can make some changes to the paragraph we see down here. A lot of designers want to put multi-column text onto their pages, and usually that involves drawing out divs and manually placing the text into each one of the locations. But what I'd like to try out next is a brand new feature that will allow us to do multi-column text right inside of a single HTML block element. So let's go back to our document, and at this time I'd like to make some changes to the content class style that we have here. As you can see, that refers to the entire div, and that simply includes 2 paragraphs down here at the bottom. So let's go in here first at the top, and we'll set up 2 new properties that will allow us to control multi-columns. The first property is column count, and this will allow us to specify a number of columns that we want our text to appear in. So I'll just set mine equal to 3. Now that will simply divide up the block element we've applied it to into 3 equal spaces. And usually with text you want a gap in between the columns. So the next property that we're going to specify is the column gap. And for now, I'll just set that to about 15 pixels. So we have a nice wide column and easy to read text. Now there are a few more properties that you can use to describe columns, but these 2 that we've used here are all we need to be able to get 3 columns with a division between them. The only problem is there's only one browser currently that supports the column count property as is, and that's Opera. All the rest of our browsers are going to need a prefix. So since I'm testing on the Firefox browser, let's go ahead and at least add the Mozilla prefix. I'll grab both of these lines right here, and I'll go ahead and paste them in again. But I'm just going to modify them by specifying the -moz prefix. We'll put a dash after that before the word column, and then I'll do the same thing for our column gap property here as well. And now this should work in my Firefox testing browser. Let's save our changes. We'll go back out and refresh the page. And now we're seeing 3-column text, and we can also see that 15-pixel gap dropped right in between each one. The text auto-wraps and falls right into the area where it's going. And as we said, this will show up in every browser except the Explorer browsers currently.